Is the US's aim to isolate India and force a war against China, weaken China and divide India, thus killing two birds with one stone? If so, is our biggest enemy the US, not China? Well, okay, good question. I appreciate the people asking good questions, incisive questions. Look, where we sit, where we, if you look at our geographical position in the world, in Asia, in Eurasia, our biggest neighbor is China. Our most immediate threat is China. Very clear. But if you zoom out, then the biggest hegemonic power is the United States, and it has power projection all across the globe, everywhere. It threatens every country. Okay, it projects power over every country, it influences every country, and it essentially arm twists every country. It arm twists Europe into accepting millions of refugees that its people don't want. It arm twists Africa in giving up its resources for peanuts. uh, it arm twists nations like Japan and South Korea and Australia and whatnot into hosting their military bases on their soil, and so on and so forth. They have power projection all across the world. So it's kind of like looking at long term versus short term threats. China is immediate, it's an immediate and present danger, okay, for India. But if India and China somehow reach some kind of understanding, some kind of modus vivendi, then for both nations, the US is the biggest long term threat. So, look, India doesn't want enmity with anybody. India doesn't want enmity with China, with the US, with anyone. But this is all being forced upon us. So when it's being forced upon you, you have to respond, you have to react, and you have to take appropriate measures. That's where we are. So what is the US's objective? The US, from the American perspective, India has very limited utility. India for the US is a good nation, that a nation that can serve as a good counterbalance to China. So in Eurasia, the Chinese and the Russians have some kind of understanding for mutually beneficial purposes. And from China's perspective, the only nation that can counter it in Asia, or challenge it in Asia, or stand up to it in Asia is India, right? And from India's perspective, China claims Indian territory. China has fought a war against India. China still threatens India all the time. So from India's perspective, China is the biggest threat. So, from the US perspective, India's limited utility is to counterbalance China. And that India can do by being a reasonably strong economic and military power. But if India says that we will keep growing at 8% for the next 20 years, that's something that America doesn't want. They say, no, 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 you stay where you are. If you are a $3 to $4 trillion economy, you remain a $4 trillion economy. Don't try to become too big for your boots. Don't try to get off the reservation. Stay in your lane. That's what the Americans want India to do. So India should stay where it is. In the ideal scenario for the US, India and China go to war, bash each other's brains out, destroy each other, and then the Americans can happily and at their own leisure take care of Russia. That is the ideal scenario from the US perspective. So that's the game the Americans are playing. Obviously, India and China are not stupid. It doesn't make sense for India and China to go to war. I think even the Chinese are realizing that now. Because if India and China go to war and certain lines are crossed, then both nations will be destroyed. Both nations have the ability to inflict significant damage on the other. And who stands to lose more? The Chinese stand to lose more. They have a what's the economy, like 17 trillion or whatever it is. They stand to lose everything they've built over the past 30 years. And India also stands to lose a lot. So what's the point of fighting? I mean, India and China, we have a common border, the India-Tibet border. So we're gonna be adversaries as long as China occupies Tibet. That we understand. But for the time being, it looks like India and China may have come to a realization or understanding that we need to, whatever conflict we have, we need to postpone for the next 5-10 years. Then we'll look at it. So looks like there's this common understanding and realization that the biggest enemy is the shared enemy, which is not in Eurasia, geographically, physically.